Good morning, everybody. It is the Hugh virtual chat, and my voice sounds maybe a little bit heavy, sad, maybe a combination of everything. It's very gray to outside, not bright sunshine like it has been in the past few days. And I'm sure everybody has their own thoughts and feelings on what's happening in this world right now. And we're not talking isolation, COVID-19 pandemic. We're talking about anger, frustration, racism, violence. I don't know the answer, but I feel positive we'll get to the end of the tunnel and into the light together. And so, having said that, today we're talking a lot about celebrating life, culture, your own ethnicity. Folklore is one of it is our largest summer festival. And like so many other festivals, of course, Folklore decided to cancel this year. But we'll find out on how many different ways we can celebrate this multicultural festival in a different way. And then my good friend Cynthia, all the way from Colombia, is joining in on the Zoom today. She's going to show us how we can all celebrate Pride Week in our own very special way too, in this new way of life. So let's open up the Zoom and welcome all the ladies. Hello, everybody. Hi. Welcome. Oh, yes. Oh my gosh, Susie, I love your coat or jacket or it is amazing. Oh, hi. Cynthia, my goodness, where are you? It looks like you're in a library.
No, just still in my room. Great background, though.
Yeah, you know, it reminds me of, we were actually, a year ago to this day, we were in Portugal. We were actually in the Algarve, but we were in Porto before. And that's where the Harry Potter library is, where J.K. Rowling grew up and where she based the Harry Potter books on this library. And that's what it reminded me of. It's amazing. It had that double spiral wooden staircase, stained glass windows. Oh, you know, I don't know about all of you, but to think about happier times and times where things were so much different than they are right now. I might start with Charlotte and Kirsten. I'm a little sad. I'm kind of like feeling a little like how Susie was, you know, the other day. Just a little like, what's going on? And very confused on, even confused on what the right thing is to say these days. It may sound strange, but
so I can say that I think a lot of people are feeling what you're feeling, Tracy, and that it is okay not to know what to say or what to think or whatever. And if you don't know what to think and what to say, the best thing you can do is listen to people from the communities that are experiencing this firsthand, what they have to say. So today on social media, you'll see a lot of blackout posts, basically started by the music industry and talking about the show must be paused. And that gives us the opportunity to amplify and to share the voices of women and of people in the Black community to share what they are experiencing and what they need us to know. So this is a learning opportunity for everybody to really sit in your uncomfortable silence and listen to what other people have to say and listen to their lived experience. Uncomfortable silence is okay. Mm-hmm. Sometimes saying nothing, I know a lot of people say saying silence is, complicity. And I don't think that's necessarily true, because sometimes if you don't know what to say or you don't understand the issues, you need to educate yourself. And that is okay. To become educated, to learn, to listen, those are all good things. Sometimes people who don't have that lived experience, saying nothing is the gift that you can give by educating yourself.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. And I want to say welcome to, we've got some guests here. Welcome back, Tina and Melinda. And Nina, do you want to give a wave too? Hi, Nina, nice to meet you. And hi, Primrose, it's been a while. I'm so happy to see you. Yes, so we're we're going to actually, ladies, talk a little bit first about some festivals. So first of all, with Cynthia, Pride Week, and I know that, again, it's one of those things where it's all new to us. So fill us in on how we can celebrate.
Yeah. Well, I shared 10 ideas that, how to deal with it. And of course, this was before, as Susie, so well put, kind of the current situation. And like you, I struggle in this era of wanting to celebrate Pride and so forth, but to be aware of my brothers, sisters, and siblings in the BIPOC community who are experiencing a completely different environment than myself. So to them, I am shutting up and listening as I'm trying to figure out what to say and how to say it. For those that are looking to celebrate, some of the ideas that I put together was glitter goes with everything. And so I'm actually traveling with a particular major vendor's glitter pack from last year, and certainly use it to spice things up. And Pride is always a wonderful time for glitter. Listening and reflecting, learning how to accept. And if you are accepting but you don't get it, then asking the questions and listening so that you understand, which follows the acceptance piece. And, finally, the last piece I'll touch on was to dance, like just to let go to all of this emotion and everything that we're feeling, and just to let it out. And there's so many amazing playlists that are on Spotify and Apple playlists, etc., that allow us to express ourselves. And certainly, I think we're all feeling this internal angst and just struggling to deal with it. And sometimes we just need to clear that out. And for me, dance is how I do that. So leave it there. But I did come up with 10 ideas that's sitting on my blog that folks can read. But we'll kind of leave it there, as I know we've got lots of great folks to hear from. So thanks.
Well, we'll definitely come back to you. So Nina, welcome. I had reached out to Tina and Melinda because Folklorama, once again, one of the biggest festivals canceled. It's near and dear to my heart, covering it and also volunteering. But yourself too this year, how are you kind of, celebrating Folklorama? And I know I made a couple of notes that Folklorama is trying to do kind of a new kind of way to celebrate too as well. And maybe you can shed more light on that too.
Absolutely. Hi, thanks so much for having me on this show. It's really great to be here this morning. In terms of celebrating Folklorama, I'd say that Folklorama isn't limited to just that 1 week in August where we all get together, but being part of the Chinese community and celebrating my Chinese identity is something I do year long. So I definitely say that there's a lot of opportunity now to reflect on what that means and how I'm able to continuously celebrate my Chinese heritage in spite of Folklorama being canceled. But COVID-19 has definitely made me reflect on how to do that and what it means in particular now to be Chinese, and what my relationship is to COVID-19 and the community to continue strengthening it and fighting for justice and just better recognition of what's going on right now.
What were some of the, difficulties in the beginning, or have you seen, Nina? We had talked about the racism and the anti-discrimination campaign, and now all of this happening throughout the world. How has this changed you and the Chinese community?
I'd like to say that it has brought us together in recognizing that, you know, initially the movement was very much like, let's recognize that we're all human. Like the virus affects everybody. It's not limited to race. So let's bond together and try and, you know, get through this virus together. But as that sentiment becomes lost, I think that it's more important for us to realize that there are inequities and differences in how people are experiencing this virus, and to really think about what togetherness means in this moment, and to go forward recognizing that, you know, we need to address those inequalities, and this discrimination that's being faced by minorities and of marginalized communities in order for us to meaningfully move past this virus and come to a better point after it.
Right. Tina, yes, and you're heavily involved in Folklorama, and I know all the ladies here know, but maybe for our listeners and the others that are going to be watching this video, Folklorama was started in 1970 as just a one-off event, and you just celebrated 50 years last year, and a record-breaking year for attendance, and we're talking thousands and thousands of visitors that come into our city for those 2 weeks, and it's always a wonderful time to reconnect. But Tina, you've been so involved with this, and there was talk because 50 years of the same kind of festival, wow, maybe isn't it time to kind of change it up? Well, careful what you ask for, because it is looking a lot different, isn't it?
Yeah, will be a very interesting summer, I think, for us, for many of the ethnocultural communities across the city. And, when I think about my experience with the Chinese community, I came to Winnipeg about 20 years ago, and the moment I first came, I met someone in the Chinese community, and she instantly, it happened to be the summer, so she took me to Folklorama, and I think, I've to the Chinese Pavilion, and I, have been part of our organizing of it ever since. But I've been thinking, particularly in the last few days, a little bit about what were the roots of the original Folklorama Festival. And, we've seen its transformation like so many festivals, and, like Cynthia's talked about with Pride festivals, the transformation from being these really grassroots, politically engaged and activist festivals, and to the way that both, out of necessity, but also as they grow and communities grow and express themselves differently, the way that the corporation and corporatization becomes part of those festivals as well. And, particularly as I look at, what's happening currently, I've been thinking a lot about the way that anti-racism was at the foundation of Folklorama from its very beginnings. And in many ways, providing a space for communities to say that they had pride in their culture and to empower communities to do that and to express themselves in the ways that they wanted to was really important. But, it's certainly, festivals like that, cultural festivals, have long been the source of criticism for many political activists as well, who see it as too limited, that, we all, I think many of us here, love dance, food, and culture and these kind of performances. And, there are key parts of who we are, but they certainly don't define all of it. And for me, much like Nina was saying, my involvement in Folklorama, what I've really come to appreciate along the way is that the shows that people see and consume are such a small fraction of its meaning to the community, that actually its meaning is the very acts of coming together over the year, planning, figuring out how you're going to work through things, what type of show you want to put on. So while it might look like it's quite similar all the time, it really is about connecting with new sets of volunteers, with kind of, even though the performances look the same, they're new people learning them. They're often deciding what it means in their own kind of place, whether they're first, second, third generation, newer immigrants, what's their relationships. And so I've come to appreciate that Folklorama is actually more about community building. And so what makes me particularly sad is for our community, Folklorama is a moment where we draw a much broader base of volunteers than we do at any other point in the year. And they come from many different places. And so I'm really sad that we don't have that opportunity, much like we run a street festival, and that's also in limbo, and that's another place where we draw these. And so it's really, how do you get people together in a kind of community formation? Because it often takes a project. You need a project to figure out to work together. And so, because I agree with Nina that you know, we all celebrate our culture in different ways all the time. And I think the Folklorama as an organization will ensure that those spaces are still there. But I think more about the grassroots moment. So what is, you know, how do we really, you know, strategize and be much more intentional, I think, in about our community formation and what that might look like. I have no answers yet, but that's what I've been thinking about, particularly as we also have to, I think, return to those ideas of anti-racism and why we're involved in these. So what are the messages that we're trying to bring, and how do we both, you know, I think we talked last time about be co-conspirators with those who are targets of specific moments, but also be responsible and accountable for ourselves and how we form our community. So those are my thoughts at the moment.
Well, they're all great. No doubt a great project. Well, and it's true. Even if you think of it, how things like Folklorama, Folk Fest, the Fringe that count on so many volunteers, how will that look even next year? You know, I think we also talked about safety, right? Creating a safe environment, and we hear that whether we're going back to work or anything like that. Primrose, you're joining us today. What are some of your thoughts? Celebrate. I'm sure you've been involved in Folklorama too at some point in time.
Yeah, I'm actually on the production team with the Pearl of the Orient Philippine Pavilion, and I run the cultural display. And I've been involved with them for years. My children dance, so it's very different this year not to have anything to look forward to at the end of the year, because I know it's something that my children look forward to. As a family, we go to Folklorama, we go to all the different pavilions, and I use it as an educational experience for my children so that they could see other cultures, try different foods, and just enrich themselves. And for the Pearl of the Orient Philippine Pavilion, that's what I tried to do in the cultural displays. Like, I do interactive displays, and I actually like put the costumes on people, let people try the instruments. And I feel sad that we're not going to be able to share that this year, and that we're not going to be able to be that part of the community. Pearl of the Orient Philippine Pavilion is one of the most popular pavilions and has been for many, many years, with many sold out shows. And I know that the group is struggling right now to find their identity and what to look forward to, because this was something for the kids. We have 128 members that perform, and that's what they look forward to, these kids, these teenagers, and I feel bad for them because they aren't able to share themselves. They haven't gotten together. Like, my kids have been struggling because they haven't gotten together with their friends in the Philippine group since beginning of March. That was the last time they had seen them. And they don't just learn dance, they also learn some of the language. I was supposed to do a theater theater workshop with the students, and haven't been able to do any of that. And so I know that right now they're trying to find other ways to keep the kids engaged. They just had a Zoom chat with them on the weekend with the kids. But my son was even saying that he felt kind of out of touch because they weren't physically doing anything. So it's been very strange not to be able to see all of this, like something like Folklorama that is about diversity. It's more important than ever.
Yeah.
And yeah, exactly, it's more important than ever, and this is what we need more than ever, and we don't have it.
No. I mean, I guess, you know, they're doing a lot of these. You can bring Folklorama to your home, and you know, you can have a group perform and have, you know, some food, and then have them at your workplace or at school when schools are fully open. So I guess, you know, they're trying to, you know, keep that kind of going. But I just wanted to quickly ask you, Primrose, because when we first met, you talked, even in your home life, there's cultural differences.
Yes.
Yes. So maybe if you can fill in the other ladies too about that, and through all of this, how has this been good, or, you know, otherwise?
Well, my husband is Jewish, and I converted to Judaism as well. My children are half European Jewish and Filipino, and with our cultural differences, we've been going along. You know, it's been okay, but it was very, very strange this year because we had to celebrate Passover at home by ourselves. We had to do that virtually. Just even like with the Filipino traditions of, like, you normally have noodles with your family, and we didn't get to really do that. We didn't have the big family dinner. It's been strange. We've been trying to still be engaged with our synagogue. We're actually quite engaged with the synagogue. My son is having his bar mitzvah this year. He's been having his bar mitzvah lessons virtually. However, the synagogue is closed itself, and we were actually quite involved in the synagogue. My son, my oldest son, he's actually one of the stars in the. They don't do a sermon during the family services. They do a puppet show, and my son plays one of the key characters in the puppet show. And this is every single Saturday for the past 3 years, and it's just a change. Not going to synagogue on Saturdays, and not going to Philippine dance practice on Sundays. Our weekends are very cultural, and we haven't had that.
Wow. Oh, that's so interesting. And Melinda, how are you doing? Yeah, you're going through a lot too, and but
you know what? I mean, I think all the other entrepreneurs here can relate. This in the cultural community, sorry, as well as the corporate. We need to pivot. It's just a pivot. I mean, it's okay to mourn what we know as normal. Yeah, you can't discount that. It's difficult, but it's also, I like to think of it, and maybe it's too rose-colored glasses Pollyanna, but to think that find an opportunity in all of this. I mean, I look forward to reading Susie's mom blog soon to see how to handle festivals with your children and how to describe that to your children. And I love Primrose's, personal experience hearing about her kids. And I find that not only do our kids need reassurances, but I need reassurance. My peers need reassurance. So I think that's something, because sometimes you're just thinking, well, hey, we have to be strong for the kids. We have to be strong, but it's okay to mourn the fact that we won't be able to have Folklorama. And yes, we're very privileged that, that we can still do it virtually and everything, but it's okay. It's okay to be grouchy about it, but because it was a lot of hard work that we don't really get too much to show for. But with the Folklorama at home, we do our best to celebrate this province's diversity, this country's diversity, our world's diversity. I mean, as Tina said earlier, we celebrate music, our culture, and our food. Every single pavilion has that. That's a common denominator. We all have culture, so we can still share it. It's just going to be a little different. And yeah, so that's really my thoughts in all of this. I really just want to keep when it talks about Folklorama, Nina and Tina, I want them to be more of the spokespeople for it. But yeah, it's just, I'm really appreciating this conversation. And just one more note on Pivot. Hue Chat, we used to meet the Hue crew all together across a couch or several chairs. This, I miss those days, but this is almost even better because you have more people. You've pivoted, and look at this. We're really opening it up. And Tracy, thank you, and all of you, the regular panelists, just open this up to even more people to join the conversation. So, yeah.
Well, no, I think that's the opportunity for me, totally, Melinda, as I've been able to open it up and meet so many and keep in touch with people that are across the world. Charlotte and Kirsten now, and then just tweaking, because we're talking a lot about our kids and everything, and it was mentioned that someone close to me said, I fear for my kids, and their kids are like young teenagers, and what kind of world we're going to be leaving them. So I know that's pretty heavy, but it was, yeah, and I don't know, is that like something that you hear now from parents, because you do a lot of peer support? Charlotte?
Was waiting to see which one the person was going to take this heavy one. I was hoping she would. One of the things that happened, my daughter, my oldest, lives in Calgary, and so she sent me a picture yesterday of, look what I'm doing, Mom, and she was making signs to go to the protest in Calgary. And my first reaction was, please stay safe. And she's like, Mom, it's at 11 in the morning, I'll be safe. But I immediately, everything in me, spidey senses, everything was saying, please don't go, because I need you to stay safe. And she says, I have to go because I need to stand and make a stand. So in that way, the young people are really the ones who are doing the protesting, that are being gentle but taking a stand. Those are the ones who are going to make a big difference. I look back in when we were all growing up, and most of us are similar age. Well, maybe Tracy and I, and sorry, Cynthia, I'm throwing you in that too, because I think we're. But I mean, we grew up in those years of being very fearful of the world getting blown up during by missile crisis. So I remember my parents being very fearful of what kind of a world were we going to be raised in. And I know that's kind of a little different. I also grew up in Memphis in the aftermath of Martin Luther King being assassinated and racial rioting and that same fear of what are we growing up in as well. And we seem to find the resilience and the strength to move on. But I think in this case, with what's going on in the States and in Canada as well, the young people aren't going to put up with it. And they're the ones who are really coming forward and saying, we need to make this change. And all of us who are a little bit older need to stand and support them in this. And I think that's how we're going to come across as really making a difference. We see this in the mental health world all the time about the white privilege. And in part of our peer training, we identify it, we talk about it. We do it through what we call, bias discussion. And when Kirsten and I are working with families, we always are very careful in what we say, try this, because in a lot of cases, our address is South Winnipeg. So if we call the police, they come. Do they treat us a little bit differently? Absolutely. When you have a visible minority, the color of your skin, and you're presenting with mental health challenges, you're treated differently than I hate to say it, a white person. So that's hard, and it has been a big part of our training for years, that identifying that. Kirsten, do you want to add to this conversation?
Yeah, I'll just add a little bit. I want to go back to when Tracy first opened and was putting forth how you're not feeling great, and I think everybody on this planet right now, especially parents, are really, really concerned and are not okay. And I think we all have to take a moment and realize it's okay to not be okay. Like, there's some really scary things going on in the world right now. And when we talk about, mental health, and what Charlotte and I see a lot of, somebody else, I think it was Susie, chatting about being an active listener. And that's part of our training as well as in our peer support training, is truly learning those skills to be an active and present listener, and to really not just listen in anticipation of what you're going to say next, but to really just pause and take a step back and be a true active listener, especially when you're listening to someone who's not okay. And how to respond to that, I think Charlotte would agree. We often, the first thing that you can respond with is, how can I support you with that? How can, and that the conversation will start. But it's just sharing space with people, and checking in on people, and being a really good listener in conversations, and knowing that you're not alone. A lot of people feel like they're off their balance, they're off their center. They go to bed with a heavy heart, they wake up with a heavy heart. And having those conversations with your children, it's a different time. I mean, we've got civil unrest all over the world. We're in a pandemic. This is, who would have thought? Who would have thought Yeah.
And just to add another swirl to this conversation, yesterday's training that we're doing for the all the peer workers who are going into the two hospitals, CRC and the Dauphin Hospital, was how do you maintain your peer support values and everything that where you're being trained when you're there supporting somebody that has a different view to you. And we use the example of what happens if you have to support someone who has racist beliefs that they start to vocalize. And so that was a very interesting training yesterday for these 25 people that are starting work, because you have your personal beliefs and everything that you stand for, and then here you are trying to maintain a neutral stance to support them through their mental health. So just something else to think about that we're going through too. And one final story I was just sharing with you, I have a good friend who's one of the best peer workers in our city. She's Indigenous, she's my age. She's got a metabolism that we would all kill for. She's skinny, and I shouldn't say that, but she is. And her sister's struggling, and she called the police for support, and she was immediately labeled a crackhead, given what she looked like. And so she called me afterwards to say, okay, what could I have done differently? And, because, she was in a moment of crisis with trying to be with her sister, but she was completely profiled on who she was, so.
Wow. Yeah. Do you want to share anything, Cynthia? You've been listening.
Yeah, it's it's really interesting with what Charlotte and Kirsten were sharing. More than once, today my son's 27 today, my daughter's 23 later this month. I've apologized. I don't think in what was the word Charlotte said, into our age group, that we stood up and did what we could have done. We did at the time, but certainly apologizing for this world and these challenges that we never really resolve. I think that is something that, again, the youth are showing true leadership in stepping out here. And really, I think back into the world of pride. And certainly in the world of pride, there's been this debate, this discussion going on. And it's, well, is pride a celebration or, is it a protest? And I personally think it's both. But the origins of pride itself was the Stonewall riots in New York. And remembering that, here we are 50 years later, still challenged with, the work of trying to create a truly diverse, equitable, and inclusive world for those that identify within the LGBTQ+IA world. And we're still not there. But also the work that I've done in the women's movement. It goes right back to first wave feminism. And again, we're still not there. We're still not recognizing the true diversity, equity, and inclusion in all aspects of life. So is this the human condition? I don't think so. I think this is the conditions of the more modern world, the last 100 years or so. And it really speaks to a very different world. And I think we're seeing that culminate in all of these tragedies today. It's a struggle to try and stay upbeat. It is a struggle to find the silver lining, the upside. But then, there's been lots of upsides since the big tumultuous beginnings of many of these movements. And I think we're at a point where we have to go beyond the climb of the movements, where we have to see an evolution to deal with this, whether we're talking, in the various phobias of homophobia, transphobia, biphobia, whether we're talking about racist or xenophobia. doesn't matter. You know, I would put even, you know, body shaming, you know, within that, like, we have to change. We have to move forward. And this feels like a monumental moment where change can happen from. And it's not us making the change. We're no longer the leaders. It is the youth. They own it, and they're taking ownership, and they're making change. And that's why I continue to look at the youth as um, they are absolute inspiration to me. That is the upside. That is the silver lining, is that we actually have true leaders in our youth.
Wow. What do you think, Nina? I'm just going to you because I figure you're probably the youngest here. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say that I share a lot of that optimism with you, Cynthia and Charlotte, about youth taking ownership and youth playing a key leadership role in what's going on right now. It's pretty complex because I also think there is a bit of pessimism in there as well, because although youth are really the ones that are stepping up, I don't think that we are completely heard all the time when we do step up, especially when politics is a realm that very much excludes youth still. And there's a, you know, greater culture of youth not being fully, you know, involved in the political realm. And so I think that it's great to see like people my age and people who are younger standing up for really key issues like gun control in the States, or like Black Lives Matter, or environmental rights. And youth are often the face of those movements because we're the ones that are, you know, going out and striking for our future. But I think that when we talk about the more bureaucratic side of things, with what's going on in politics, youth are not always the ones that have a say in who becomes elected, what policies get implemented. And there is so much student activism and youth activism that still gets, you know, placed on deaf ears. So I think it's amazing that, you know, we are trying to take ownership, because I think that that is what we should be moving towards, is a future led by the people who are going to live in that future. But it's just really complex and sometimes sad to see that our efforts are not always fully realized. And so it's always just a dynamic struggle between, you know, making ourselves heard, and having us heard, you know. And so, you know, this is the right direction, but like, as like a lot of people have said, these movements are, you know, not overnight sort of things. They're really slow processes and things that people have been fighting for, you know, 50, 100 years from today, are, you know, still not completely realized. So yes, we're becoming a more progressive society, but we have a lot of work to do. And it's important to, you know, remember that, is that our work is never done, because once we think that the work is done, then that's when we stop trying. So for us to keep trying is the best thing that we can do right now, and just keep trying to make our voices heard as youth.
And you have my vote when you run for mayor or for any kind of become our first prime minister, okay?
I just want to do full disclosure. Tina and I were actually Nina's advisors when she was on the Chinese Youth Committee, in their youth group. So she is just so mature and wise beyond her age. But I think our generation, it's our job to empower youth, and it's our job to listen and to allow them to find their way. And this is something that I don't want to get too much into it, but Tina and I, for the last 2 years, have been advocating for our community's youth. And Tina in particular has been advocating, you know, at the university for beyond the Chinese community. I'm so proud of Tina. She actually does advocate for a lot of LGBTQ, and sorry, Cynthia, I'm forgetting the other the other letters afterwards. community as well, and even that community within the Chinese community. So I think what we can all just vow to do is really listen to our youth. Make sure that they understand that their opinions are important. They have a voice. So that's all I wanted to say. Sorry.
And I'm going to add on to that, Melinda, as well, is that, so, you know, sitting on a committee and doing all of these activism things in your youth are great, but also it starts with seeing your parents vote and seeing your parents run for office or being involved in political campaigns for your friends and community, and getting involved at that level, because that's when legislative change happens, that's when actual change can happen. So, you know, what we're seeing right now with what's happening in the States is, and I feel like we were told for a long time that everything's okay, everything's just fine, you know, but under the surface, it was always bubbling. It was always there. There were microaggressions all the time. And suddenly we reached a fever pitch where it's no longer, you can no longer say everything's okay, because it's just not. And I'm seeing, you know, like my kids' age and their generation, all of them are aware of what's happening on social media right now. They're all aware of what's happening in the States right now. And one of the things that I said on my blog last week is that if you have kids, tweens or teens, they know what's happening. You need to talk to them right now about what they're hearing, what they're seeing. And when I say talk to them, I mean listen, actually. So ask them what they're seeing, what they're feeling, what they know about the situation. And you need to have that conversation and provide the historical context for what is happening today, so that they understand how we got here and how their generation right now through doing things can actually affect change. That is the most important part of what our youth are experiencing right now, is that we need to help them become mobilized and understand what their role is in this change as well. Because yes, it is absolutely the youth. And I love Generation Z, Generation Z. They give zero, pardon my French, fucks about any of this stuff. And they will burn it all down and start again. And I'm here for it. I'm totally here for it.
Oh, and Susie, I wanted to ask you, and I know that you'll have the good answer. What is microaggression?
So we had a great conversation about this on CGOB this morning. I did a call with them, and we basically talked about what that term means and what it can feel like. And Dr. Raymond, who is a great guy on social media, Twitter, and a clinical psychologist, had a segment before me, and he touched on it. And then I kind of answered a bit more of it as well. And part of it has to do with, again, you know, we're all told that it's okay, you're just being sensitive, it's not a big deal, that kind of thing, right? And so it can start with, the question came from a listener actually who texted it in and said, so what's wrong with asking somebody where they're from? Okay, so let's talk about that. Because it's about the intent behind that question, right? So if I go to a conference where everybody's flown in and I'm traveling there and everyone's asking, hey, like, where are you from? Where are you from? That's fine. We are all going to be answering, I'm from Winnipeg, I'm from Canada, whatever it might be. But the second part of that question, because there's always a second part to that question, is the but. Where are you really from? That's the microaggression, okay? Because now you're saying that my first answer wasn't good enough. I'm hiding something. I don't belong here. I'm some kind of other, and you're making it seem, you're telling me basically that there's something else to that answer. And that is the microaggression, because you're taking it as small talk. It's just an innocent question. I'm just asking you where you're from. What's your heritage? What are you doing here? And to me, that is a different conversation. Again, we talked about degrees of separation too. So if that's a friend or someone I'm getting to know, that's a different context. Okay. But if I'm sitting in a job interview, if I'm sitting in a professional setting and you ask me that question, you have to ask yourself why you're asking that question. What is the first answer that I gave? Why is that not good enough for you? What are you really trying to get to? You're trying to get to where I came from in terms of where my parents came from. Do I belong here? Are they illegal? Am I illegal? Like, what's the point of that question? Those are microaggressions. And that's just one example of small, quote unquote, things that people present to people of color, women of color, whatever it might be, to feign interest when what they're really doing is othering you. And that is not cool at all. Not cool.
Wow, interesting.
I'd like to add to that. I really have a problem with the terms, where are you from? If someone wants to know where I'm from, I answer honestly, I'm from Winnipeg because this is where I was born. But absolutely no, where are you really from? Or really, you're not from here. Where are you really from? That question just aggravates me so much, because it's like, that's not what the question is. If you want to know what my ethnicity is, then ask. Like, if someone is genuinely curious what my ethnicity is, then ask that. Don't feign it. Don't say, where are you from? Because you're basically asking, why are you brown? And one thing, I had this conversation with my children last year after I'd been asked that, and I'd come home and I was just angry about it. Because I was at Shoppers Drug Mart, and a busker had asked me, oh, where are you from? And I said, from Winnipeg. And he says, no, you're from the Philippines. Mabuhay. And I'm like, what? And I just walked away. I was just so angry. I didn't want to engage. And I came home, I was frustrated, and I talked to my kids about it. And I asked my youngest son, who at the time was 7, I asked him, when somebody asks you, where are you from? What do you say? And he says, from Canada. Because that's all he knows, because he doesn't understand what the question is. I asked my older son, and he was 10 at the time. I asked him, if somebody asks you, where are you from? He says, from the Philippines. Because at 10 years old, he already knew what the question was. And I asked him, who's from the Philippines? Am I from the Philippines? And it's like, no. It's like, because I'm born here. Is Daddy from the Philippines? No, because he was born here. What about what? And he says, but Nanay and Tatay, that's what they call their grandparents. They're from the Philippines? I'm like, they've been in Canada since 1974. Mm-hmm. So you think they're asking you where you're from where your grandparents lived in the 1970s? And he's like, because that's what they want to know. And I'm like, I hope you never answer that way again, because that's not it.
Right. So Primrose, at 10 years old, your child has already understood the subtext of that question.
Exactly.
Right? That is a microaggression.
That is absolutely
aggression against a child, no less, right? He's already learned to read that code and understand what's really being asked of him. That's heinous, as far as I'm concerned. Heinous.
Horrible.
Yeah.
So he doesn't say that anymore.
And the thing is too, so you talk about, like, your kids, your children are half Filipino, mine are like a quarter, I guess. So again, it's about the visual presentation, right? So I get sometimes 2 people can't tell what I am. So I get the fishing expedition, right? Where they just don't know what they're trying to drive at. And then sometimes they think that I'm Indigenous as well. And I love to watch that person squirm. I'll watch them drive that fishing boat all over the place. And I just sit there and just let it happen, because the further they go, the stupider they sound. And, it's not up to me to provide education in that moment.
Exactly. I've also gotten Indigenous because my family is from the northern part of the Philippines, and as you know, that is the tribal area of the Philippines, in the Cordillera area. And so I've gotten that. I understand that. But what's funny is that I get asked that question a lot. And I asked my husband, because he said to me, he just said, is it really that big a deal? And I said, have you ever been asked that question? And he's like, I guess not, no. And it's like, that's what the difference is. I get asked.
Question is, so does your slur change depending on how I present? Like, which way are you trying to go with your aggression? How rude and inappropriate do you want to be depending on what you think I am, right? Yeah. Not appropriate at all.
Can I ask a question? I would love Susie's answer on this. Actually, I think all of us would love to go to Susie's school, because we learned so much. So I grew up in the States, as you guys know, and I'm Canadian by birth. So if you ask an American what they are, they say American first, always. When you ask a Canadian what they are, they don't normally say Canadian first. So just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
So I do answer Canadian, for sure, always. I've never not said Canadian, unless someone's asking the city I come from, right? That's a different answer. But no, I always say Canadian. When we travel, I've got the Canadian flag on my luggage, on my, my backpack, all that stuff. I am so proud to display that flag and to be Canadian. That my parents chose this place and that I was born here is the luckiest straw I could draw.
So I'm going to jump in there, Tracy. I think it's interesting when we think about these questions, I grew up, I'm mixed race. And so, this is part of my experience. And I've been listening to all of you talk and, I'm thinking very much about, I think some of those books that many of us have found formative in the last few years, like Sarah Ahmed's work on living a feminist life and what it means to be seen as being difficult. And I'm often telling the story how, and this goes back to Primrose's story as well, as a child in elementary school in the late 70s and early 80s, we used to always have to do cultural display. And I think this maybe takes us back to, my both joy of Folklorama and I think what's an inherent critique of the whole system of celebration. And they would tell us to bring a food from our home. And, I inevitably, at some point I would say that my mother's from Northern England, from a working class family. And I remember saying, I'll bring fish and chips. And the teacher said, you can't do that. And to be honest, my mom was the only person who volunteered at the school. They all knew her very, very well. So, it wasn't, and they said, you can't do that. And I was like, so then I start on, should I bring a pint of, should I bring beer? Should I bring, and I just start going through all the most ridiculous essentialist British foods that I can think of. And, clearly then they tell my mom this isn't okay. So then my grandparents were from southern China, but my father was born in Burma, where he only spent a very short part of his life because the Japanese occupied Burma and they fled. And then he grew up in India. So, then I would say things and I was like, well, then clearly, being Chinese was what they wanted me to be, but I would refuse to that. And I was like, but I understand how exoticization works. So then I was like, great, I will bring some Burmese food. I had zero context for that. We pulled out some cookbook and come up with some recipe that, was not palatable to any of us. My mother made it. And I would bring this in year after year. And I would do things. And I can remember I would pull up the National Geographic and I'd look for the most exotic representations of Burma and I would bring it in. And so, that way of learning to play the game. But I think when I think back on these moments, what I find really troubling in much of this, and I guess this is where, and I think it goes back to Cynthia, some of her opening comments, is that, we can see how much race really over-determines an ethnicity, even the way that we either want to empower people or how we organize. Oh, I hope you can still hear me. It says my internet is unstable. And that we assume that people's primary identity is going to be around some kind of race and not around questions of sexuality or class or the various intersections. And so that we often turn to them, and I love Susie's explanation of microaggressions, but I always just think about how we also already think we know what the hierarchy is for people about where their identity should be. And so, going back to some of Nina's comments about empowering youth and where youth are, I think, the best, I always think we should, I like festivals because they tell people you can celebrate your identity. But for me, it's really saying to people, you can choose them in whichever way, and we have to listen to how you want to express them and when and how, and that we really have to kind of open up and explode those spaces and understand how they won't necessarily fit in the constructs that we presume that there's kind of a list that we can work through. And, because I'm thinking about that particular in this moment and, thinking about QPOC friends and thinking about what that means in, moments of pride and in the sort of, heightened racial tensions of places, and just, it becomes so much more complicated. But, it is a reminder that for, those of us who've been taught, and in many ways we've been taught by people from outside how they view us, so we respond in that way. But again, race and ethnicity aren't always the primary ones, even though it's such a source of microaggression and just racism in the everyday. So I just want to kind of throw that in there.
Oh, well, thank you. Yes, we see a lot of nodding heads. Whoa, so very, very heavy subject. Woo! And I thought, well, okay, let's talk about summer vacation. But maybe we'll leave that to next week. Oh my goodness. Does anybody else have anything, Cynthia?
Yeah, I mean, I completely relate. I've shared in the chat that, I am not Canadian by birth. I came to Canada in 1972, and not once have I been asked, where am I from? I mean, talk about privilege. I think at least I'm aware that that's privilege. That's a start. And then it's how I use that. The other one that, as Nina was talking about, I think the two things come to mind is, again, for those of us with political privilege to vote and to create a voice, is to use privilege to create a space so that youth voices can be amplified. And I would also challenge everyone that what Nina referred to, and that we know that these movements take a long time, but we were saying that about the environmental movement, and honestly, I mean, there's no bigger feminist agenda item than the environment, Mother Earth, right? Mother Earth does not need us, but we need Mother Earth. How much bigger feminist issue can we have? And yet we found, boy, can the world move really quick under the threat of COVID. And I think that has to be the new benchmark that we expect the world to deal with, those critical issues that literally talks about our survival and the survival of the planet we live on. At least it's having a chance to heal a bit right now, but oh my gosh, we need to hold everyone more account, but use the privilege, whichever form we have it, but use it to amplify everyone else's voices who are not being heard, who are not experiencing the world as we see it. And I can tell you, moving from a world where I was part of that powerful white male majority of holding power of both financial and representative power privilege, into a more marginalized role as a transgender woman. And I can tell you that, oh my gosh, the world sure looks a lot different these days. And I see it with completely different eyes. And it's not that the world changed, it's that I changed, and I changed my point of view in order to see it.
Wow. Well, all I can say, Cynthia, is that we love you for being who you are, and courage. And courage is too. I mean, and we see that in the youth. The youth have courage because they're young, they're not afraid. As you get older, you learn too much and the fears do start to creep in. But I thank you all, everybody, for this conversation. I think
before we stop for today, Tracy, I just want to remind people that there is a rally on Friday, June 5th at the Legislative Building for Black Lives Matter, Justice for Black Lives. And I'm sure they would welcome any allies to show up and be there.
Thank you. At what time again?
It says 6 p.m.
Yeah, and that's this Friday.
Correct, June 5th, 2020.
Well, hopefully we'll see some of you out there. Safe distancing, of course. But be safe, be kind to each other, and be kind to yourself too. So we'll see you all next week, next Tuesday. Now, hands up, I don't know, who has watched the Epstein on Netflix miniseries? Nobody.
Yeah,
Don't
watched it. No, I watched it.
Yeah, no, it's
terrifying.
So I'm working on inviting Joy Smith back next Tuesday. They're actually in this kind of drive to get money for their organization. But it was just it was heart-wrenching. It was with everything that's going on, that this also is a huge thing and a huge problem that's not going to go away. And I know that Kristen and Charlotte can weigh in heavy on this too. Primrose, hopefully you can join too. Melinda and Tina and Nina. Yes, and I would love more young people like Nina to join. So Nina,
and I'm going to say as well that it's never too early to start talking to your kids about consent and what sex trafficking is.
Yeah,
truly.
Yeah. So on that great happy note,
can we just say self-care after this? And whatever that looks like for you guys, and remembering that we only have control over ourselves in this moment, because we covered a whole bunch of topics, and just whatever self-care looks like for you. So please remember.
Thank you, Charlotte. Well put, well said. On that note, self-help, self-presence for everybody. See you next Tuesday.
Thank you.